to point a ship that will go around the Cape, along the western coast, to the Cameroonian port of Douala, and then by road to Bangui. The French are there ahead of you. That's why they drink in Bangui Kenyan tea, christened as English breakfast tea. But with an upset, we can be able to take our goods there. But this infrastructure, Kenya is part of Africa. So what Kenya is going to get is equivalent to what the rest of Africa is going to get. If you improve matters in Africa, Kenya becomes a beneficiary. One example I want to give is intra-African trade. Intra-African trade currently stands at only 15%. Africa trades very little with itself. Inter-European trade stands at 70%. Inter-Asian trade is now getting towards 60%. Even South America stands at about 30%. But Africa does not trade with itself for reasons, some of which are actually solvable, or problems solvable. You see, there are non-tariff barriers which have been introduced by some African countries, which makes it very difficult for goods to move from one African country to another African country. Secondly, there is infrastructure challenges that makes it very difficult for Africa to trade with itself. You know, Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is now 2 years old, but still very little progress has been made, mainly because of these two major barriers. As the High Representative on infrastructure, I realized the challenges. Like you've been talking about intra-African highways, the Cape to Cairo, the Dakar to Djibouti, Dakar, Lagos, Lagos, Mombasa, and so on and so forth. We've been talking about the continental high-speed railway network, one Beira to Walvis Bay, one the old Benguela line, Lobito to Lubumbashi. The other one is the high-speed railway along the coast from Lagos to Cairo. The other one is our LAPSET, the Lamu Port, South Sudan, Ethiopia Transport Corridor, which as a representative of the AU on infrastructure, we actually extended from Juba through Bangui in Central African Republic to the port of Cameroon to create a land bridge that links the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean and opening up the interior of the continent, which are landlocked, for trade. See, for example, Kenya grows tea. How does Kenya export its tea to Central African Republic? Between Kenya and Central African Republic, there's only South Sudan. South Sudan is the only country between Kenya and Central African Republic. But how do you take the tea there? There's no infrastructure. You have to find a ship that will go around the Cape, along the western coast, to the Cameroonian port of Douala, and then by road to Bangui. The French are there ahead of you. That's why they drink in Bangui Kenyan tea, christened as English breakfast tea. But with an upset, we can be able to take our goods there. But this infrastructure cannot be developed country by country. You need to have a mechanism at the center that is coordinating funding for the infrastructure. If you want to do the LAPSET, Kenya can only do its part up to the border with South Sudan. Then South Sudan needs to take it from there to the border with Central African Republic. Central African Republic takes it to Cameroon and to reach there. But you need a center to be able to coordinate funding, to mobilize funding for this infrastructure development, which are cutting across the continent. That is why those things have not been done. That's why even the trans-African highways have not been done, and so on. So, getting there, we are also talking about the high-speed fiber optic network connecting all the African capitals. We're talking about open skies, to be able to move freely in the African airspace without so much impediment. At the moment, traveling across Africa is a major problem. Recently, when I was going to the funeral of the president of Namibia, we chartered an aircraft here. We had to spend 3 hours at Wilson Airport waiting for clearances of airspaces, the transit countries. You have to get a clearance to fly over Tanzanian airspace, DRC, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia itself. And it's expensive. The other day, I was in Salam, going to Niamey, Niger. There, you had spent 10 hours waiting. You need a clearance over Uganda, over DRC, over Central African Republic, over Cameroon, Nigeria, and Niger. And that is what is making the air transport in the continent so expensive. It is easier to move goods by air. It is easier to put the facilities across the continent. And then have also an African continental air traffic control. In Europe, you only need one permit and you can fly all over the countries of Europe. Here you need to get permission from Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, Kinshasa, Lusaka, nearly going down those sides. So all these are what is making inter-African trade difficult. I've told you about the issues of visas. It's another problem, and so on and so forth. We've been talking about making the Nile River navigable, so that you can be able to move from the Mediterranean Sea to Lake Victoria. Ships can move from Europe and don't have to go around the Horn to come to our coast on the other side. You can go right on the Nile to Lake Victoria and land there in Jinja, in Kampala, in Kisumu, and in Mwanza. Those are some of the projects that could be done. And if you open up those